Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying, change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm, pouring rain on your season of drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing it?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, Scott Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne, a.k.a. the real Adam Coleman. So, you riding with Tru-ID? Well. I think we got a interesting show on our hands today. We're talking about Dr. Umar Johnson, considered to be the savior of the black race to some and Hotep hustler to others. Over the last couple of weeks, he's made quite a bit of noise, for himself. I don't want to assume that everybody out here, my listeners, know who he is or what I'm talking about. Anybody who's been following me on Facebook probably knows what's up. But just to make sure everybody's on the same page, let me give you guys a quick bio on Dr. Umar Johnson, who also refers to himself as the Prince of Pan-Africanism. And just, we're going to bring people up to speed with what we're dealing with here. So, Dr. Umar Johnson is reportedly a doctor of clinical psychology and certified school psychologist. Dr. Umar also holds degrees in education and political science. He has authored a book entitled The Psychoacademic Holocaust and the Special Education and ADHD War Against Black Boys. I work in the mental health field, so actually I might go ahead and cop that and see what he's talking about. He's a notable public speaker and has lectured in North America, South America, the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa. And according to this recent interview, lectured in China as well, speaking to African people who apparently reside in China. His speaking career is probably what, Dr. Johnson is most known for. Through that, he's been able to gain a substantial following, and internet presence, as well as fundraising support for a private school that he has made it his mission to, purchase and operate for the specific purpose of educating African or African American youth. The Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey RBG International Leadership Academy for Boys, I think is what he's called it, or will call it. He is a committed and very outspoken Pan-Africanist, which we'll be discussing that in a little bit. I think it's fair to say that Dr. Umar doesn't bite his tongue, which has made him a rather polarizing figure, and often brought a great deal of attention his way, whether positive or negative. Such was the case in that, in recent weeks in those interviews. So Dr. Umar Johnson made, recent appearances on the popular hip hop talk radio show, The Breakfast Club. And he managed to trigger, somewhat of an internet firestorm, particularly on Twitter, regarding his less than favorable comments about interracial marriage, to say the least. Let's take a quick listen to Dr. Umar Johnson from that Breakfast Club interview and get a feel for what I'm talking about here.
Love is a function of your values and your priorities. I would argue the reason black men marry white women is because they wish they were white themselves. And having the white man's prize, his queen, is a psychological symbol to myself that I am equal to him. So you can't be in love with white women and not at the same time feel inferior to white males. Who you marry tells me who you are. When you marry a woman, you don't just marry her. You marry her culture. You marry her community. You marry her people. You understand? So when a black man marries a white woman, he's making several clear points and messages he's sending out to his own people. Because there's no greater symbol of your loyalty to your struggle than to marry a sister who shares that struggle. So why would you want him to spend the rest of his life with a woman who can never understand how he feels when the New York City Police Department pulls him over?
Dr. Umar,
you need a woman who can feel you. And the only woman on earth who can understand the black man is the black woman. And that's why I cannot respect a black man who is not committed to a black woman. That's the greatest symbol of pride in self.
Now, it's not hard to see why statements like these have stirred up so much controversy, to say the least. But in addition to this, addition to that interview, it provoked a swell of memes and internet convo, with many criticizing him for his statements, Some coming to Umar's defense, but also questions about the legitimacy of his claim of having a PhD in psychology, or even claims he's made in the past of being a descendant of Frederick Douglass. Some people raised suspicions surrounding him having collected approximately $700,000 for the purchase of a school that nobody has seen as of yet. And, concerns are emerging as to what exactly he has done with the money. Inquiring minds want to know if Dr. Umar is a hero or a Hotep hustler, pretty much. It seems that for many, the jury is still out on that question. Nevertheless, Dr. Umar, seems to have a very strong following, and he's certainly a big time name amongst the, conscious community that I often speak about on this show. So due to all the social media hype surrounding his appearance on the Breakfast Club, Dr. Umar landed himself a spot on Roland Martin's talk show, on News One. It's a pretty big deal. Where there was definitely some fireworks, between him and the panel of folks that Roland Martin had on there to engage him, in dialogue / debate, I guess we could say. So that interview was most definitely, it was definitely lit. And I have to say, for the casual watcher, I'm sure it was entertaining. I think that for, most people probably felt that, or maybe not most, I don't know, but many people, felt like Dr. Umar came out looking pretty good in that interview, in some sense or another. I actually came across another interview that Dr. Johnson had did after the Breakfast Club and the Roland Martin show, which we'll be digging into that as well. So that kind of is interesting. That third interview, following up on the first two, kind of gave some interesting clarity on some of the points that Dr. Umar made. So like I said, we're going to dig into that also. So why do I find myself here at dark 30 at night recording this joint to weigh in on Dr. Umar's recent public appearances? Well, for one thing, this is the kind of a trial run. One thing I do to kind of keep my mind sharp is, I listen to interviews like these and lectures of folks who have opposing worldviews to my own. And I spend time breaking them down and making counterpoints. It just kind of keeps the mental juices flowing, So I thought, maybe every now and again, I would just, maybe take my notes, from breaking these videos down and just kind of, share them with you guys, kind of get my thoughts out there. Like I said before, I think on previous shows, you guys are my outlet, man. You know what I'm saying? I can't, sometimes, my wife, she eventually gets tired of hearing me talking about apologetics all the time. So, so I guess it's y'all's turn, I think it's interesting stuff, so I figured someone else might, so I figured I'd throw it out there, kind of see what happens. Either folks will be interested or maybe nobody cares about what I have to say. And this episode would just kind of, be what it be. But aside from that, though, discipleship, if I could sum up, what I'm about here in one word, it would be discipleship. Okay. As a Christian, I believe we should take the Great Commission, that Jesus gave to the church in Matthew 28, very seriously. He said to go out into all the world and make disciples, not just converts, but disciples. And, I'm not going to preach right now, but, if you study it out, you'll understand that, what Jesus is talking about there in regard to discipleship is the committing of oneself, to lining up their beliefs, perspectives, and lifestyles with the truth in a comprehensive way that touches all areas, all aspects of, of your life. And, every area of our lives should be lined up, with truth. And by truth, I mean ultimate truth, that is only found in God, right? Now, in a sense, you could say that Dr. Umar Johnson is a disciple of Pan-Africanism, so to speak. When you listen to the guy, it's, Pan-Africanism all day, every day, no doubt about that. Whether he's talking about economics, politics, spirituality, you name it, whatever the topic is, if Dr. Umar is in the conversation, he's going to have something to say on it from the Pan-Africanist worldview or perspective. And, I think that word worldview is the key here. Dr. Umar sees everything from the Pan-Africanist worldview or lens through which he understands the world. And I think that's one thing that his followers, probably find appealing. All of us have a worldview, whether we realize it or not. In simple terms, the purpose of a worldview is to be a framework in our thinking to answer the big questions in life and make sense of the world around us. So we all have a worldview, right? But I think that's why when folks look around society and see the Black community struggling in poverty, self-hate, injustice, history of being enslaved, and so on, then I think the Umar Johnsons of the world come along and they present a framework that seems to explain what's going on with the Black community and maybe some other things, and just people flock to it. Unfortunately, it seems that people like Dr. Umar Johnson, who do not hold a biblical worldview, are able to gain influence not only among the Black community at large, but even among those of us who are both Black and Christian. Black and Christian. Yes, I do affirm both of those as meaningful components of my identity, but more on that later on. Now, why is this the case? Why is it the case that the Dr. Umars of the world seem to be gaining a foothold even among Christians? Well, I think there's a couple of different reasons. I mean, first of all, when you listen to the guy talk, I think sometimes he's making observations about what's going on around us. And, I just kind of, for me, I kind of look at it as a rule of thumb. I mean, if I'm dealing with somebody who's of a different worldview, that doesn't mean that we won't make some of the same observations about things, so there may be some overlap between, what I believe or the worldview I hold to and the worldview that they hold to. But just because there's some overlap doesn't necessarily mean that their worldview in its entirety is something that, I would want to subscribe to, because there might be some other flaws with it in the broader scope of things that, make it, unsuitable for anybody who's a, critical thinker and just wants to align themselves with the truth. But aside from that, I just think that for far too long, man, the church has neglected discipleship, when it comes to matters related to race and ethnicity. Again, I go back to discipleship, because what's happening is, right, African-American Christians aren't being instructed as to the ideological resources, available to them within the Christian worldview by which we can have a clear, consistent, logical, and biblical framework to account for how Christianity and ethnicity fit together and how we can apply the Christian worldview to confront the types of challenges, presented by society, the society we live in. How do I as a Christian, think through and respond to things that are negatively impacting the ethnic group that I belong to? What do I think, feel, and do about Philando, Castile, Tamir Rice, the economic legacy of Jim Crow and slavery? Is it Christian of me to assert that Black Lives Matter? Is it Uncle Thomas of me to entertain the idea that in Christ there is a deeper identity that I can appeal to, that goes beyond color and culture and ethnicity? It's deeper than pigmentation, that is. Interesting questions, man. Interesting questions to ask. But because the church isn't equipping Black Christians in these areas, it has left many of us vulnerable to outside and not always healthy influences as folks seek answers to important questions. If my pastor, spiritual leadership, or even Christian parents, won't tell me how to navigate, this minefield of racism and just race-related issues that I encountered every day, then Dr. Umar would tell me, or the Hebrew Israelites, or the Moors, or whoever. It's kind of like, being a parent, man. I mean, if I don't talk to my kids about sex, I mean, shoot, I know what it was like when I was in, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I mean, kids are going to go to school and somebody's going to talk to them about sex. So it's better that I, as a parent, train them up in that regard than, to let the streets train them, I guess you could say. It's the same way, when it comes to something like the rationality of the image of God and how that relates to, who we are and what we ought to be like, and how that relates to race and, us dealing with society and culture, some of the impediments to this current society. The other side, of why I'm doing this particular episode, focusing on Dr. Umar here is, traditionally, there's a rich Christian history, of believers who were thoughtful about the Christian worldview, wrestling with the issues of their time, and then engaging the other ideological systems of their day, on crucial questions, that were floating around in the public square. I'm thinking about Tertullian against Praxeas, Bishop Cyprian of North Africa, dealing with the government of his time. Certainly, St. Augustine dealing with, Platonism and Manichaeism, I think is how it's pronounced. Or, hey, modern day, man, Dr. Martin Luther King, with these letter from Birmingham jail and pretty much all of his works. I mean, I'd say if you haven't read Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, I don't know what you've been doing. I mean, it's just a fantastic just piece of literature, man. I mean, just read it. I mean, I'm gonna give you guys a homework assignment. Go read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, right? It would definitely be well worth your time. And just think about the fact that he wrote that while sitting in a jail cell. I mean, I don't know why it took me forever to really process that, but to be able for him to write such a work just off the dome, sitting in a cell. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. Amazing talent, definitely ahead of his time. Back to it. So, when we as Christians, as the Christian community, fail to engage the ideas, the struggles, the social movements of our time, then I think we lose ground in terms of, helping people connect the dots between the truths of Christianity and their everyday life, everyday life experience, right? The truth is always relevant, and I think one way in which the church can be effective, these times, is to take the relevant issues of our time and use them to point people toward the truth, and on top of that, quite frankly, I'm just kind of irritated with Dr. Umar taking shots at the church. I think for too long, people like him have just kind of slid under the radar, of the black church. And he just stayed coming for us, man. I mean, for real, it's like every interview, he's got something to say about the church. Even in the Breakfast Club interview, Dr. Umar took a little time to bash the church, but that's cool though, because I think I believe we're seeing a new breed of Christians who are, not just going to let guys like Umar slide, take shots at the church and let it slide. We shoot back. So I guess that's part of it too. Maybe that's kind of like my battle rapper side, Anyway. So now, how should we proceed with this? First of all, let me say this. This is not a response video per se. Okay, I would consider this to be a critique video. All right. I recognize that in this fast-paced information age, where people's appetites are just kind of on memes and one-liners and just kind of soundbite kind of stuff. I mean, I know that's kind of what we're used to. We kind of treat all debates, I guess you could say, like a URL. Rap battle nowadays. People want like snappy, clever comebacks and kind of get the oohs and ahs, from the crowd. Matter of fact, let's use the rap battle as an analogy, right? I mean, in battling, you've got some MCs, okay, that are just like killer punchliners, right? They may not hit you with a bunch of intricate rhyme patterns and big words, kind of Eminem-ish, type stuff. They may just say something witty and basic, and it just really gets the crowd going. I think about guys like Sirius Jones. He was like that. Definitely he was one of my favorite battle rappers back in the day. But then you have, the rapper who might use a bunch of words, but, he puts them together in such an intricate way and weaves in metaphors and wordplay in such a way that you might have to, rewind and play it back to really catch, how dope it was, that what they said. Matter of fact, shout out, man. There's a Christian battle rapper out of Kansas City named A-War. He's a lot like that. Definitely a dope MC. Christian battle rapper, man. He's doing good work out there. Now, what we're about to dive into isn't so much like the quick response, punchliner type of thing to try to make, Dr. Umar look silly, kind of a deal. Remember, my goal here is to provoke thought. I'm kind of on my A-War tip right now. I'm saying as Christians, we need to be able to take the Christian worldview and just kind of, use and just critical thinking and apply them in ways that allow us to effectively engage, the ideas, events and challenges, et cetera, that we face in society. So what I'm trying to do here is not so much about, trying to destroy Umar Johnson. I'm not hating on the man. I don't have any ill will towards him. I more so want to decode, Dr. Umar Johnson. Okay. What we want to do here is use Dr. Umar as a test case, for how to think through and respond to these cats in the conscious community. That's what we want to do. All right. We want to be able to represent a robust and just kind of a full, display of the Christian worldview, whatever topic that we're dealing with. So we want to be able to, take what he says, break it down, expose the flaws in his reasoning, and demonstrate how his claims are faulty. All right. So, and then also we want to, give a response, from the Christian worldview, so with that said, let's get down to business. All right. Now, in watching the Roland Martin interview, with Dr. Umar, I noticed a few mistakes made by Roland in this panel. First of all, the initial part of the interview just seemed to be aimed at discrediting Umar. And I think that was a mistake. They talked about whether or not he was a doctor. Is he a descendant or a kinsman of the great Frederick Douglass? Stuff like that. Those are interesting questions. And I guess it was, maybe it was just an opportunity to really get some answers there and set the record straight, I suppose. But those are conversations that have gone on for a while now with Dr. Umar, and I think that there's just a better way to deal with him in terms of where he's coming from. There's a difference between discrediting someone and demonstrating that they are incorrect, right? It could be the case that, Umar is a fake doctor and his purported connection with Frederick Douglass is bogus. And, for all we know, he could have spent his fundraiser money for a school on, cheeseburgers and strip clubs, for all we know. I don't know. But that wouldn't get at the validity or invalidity of his claims. You know what I'm saying? And it's his claims and reasoning that I want to focus on here. Okay. Now, I have, the benefit of being able to play Monday morning quarterback here. I can sit back and listen to Umar's interviews over and over, which I have, listen back through them and pick them apart, one bit at a time. As far as the major points of contention that stood out to me in between the Breakfast Club interview and the Roland show, those are the kind of things that we're going to tackle. I've kind of listened through it a couple of times and, we're not going to go point for point, but just kind of hit the major highlights, major themes. Two of which I would say the main questions, and we'll cover some others, but the main questions I would say is probably, what has white America done systematically to even the playing field for black folks, and also, Dr. Umar Johnson's condemnation of interracial marriage. Is he right or wrong? What should a Christian think about that? Should a Christian agree with him? Or, is there something from our worldview by which we are, would be in disagreement with him on that and those things? Or certainly with the interracial marriage. We'll see what that's about. We're going to tackle each of those, in order. But in order for us to do so, effectively, we want to put a few building blocks in place. All right. We have to take a look at Dr. Umar's methods and his worldview, I think, in order to really kind of make sense of, where he's coming from and how can we can give, meaningful responses. So, let's start with methods. All right. One thing I noticed is that Dr. Umar has a tendency to make a case for something by taking a couple points that are indeed factual, and then he strings them together with either flawed reasoning or some minor detail that when you really take a look at it, isn't necessarily true. And then when you expose that minor detail falsehood, the rest of his argument falls apart. And I know he does that quite a bit, right? Now, in the moment, these things are pretty hard to catch because, like I said, Dr. Umar will hit you with a couple facts or some common sense statements and weave those falsehoods in and flawed reasoning in. And he's very passionate. He's very, he speaks with a conviction. It's just very persuasive. So in the moment, these things can be hard to catch. Now, I want to be careful here and say, let me just say at this point, I'm not suggesting that Dr. Umar is intentionally deceiving people. All right. I want to be careful about saying that. I'm not putting any intentions on him at all at this point. I'm actually inclined to believe that for the most part, I think he actually believes what he's saying and genuinely thinks that his reasoning is correct, whether it is or not. I think he really believes that he's correct. But when you engage ideas and see these missteps he makes, you might think that this guy is like too smart for these elementary mistakes. So he must be deceitful. He's too smart to make these mistakes. So he obviously is not, being authentic or genuine here. And I think that's why the gentleman on Roland's show jumped in the convo and immediately, just told Umar that he was a liar or that he was lying. Right. I don't think that was, I don't think that was a good idea. Unfortunately, that part of the interview, I think, benefited Umar because, in all fairness, while I don't advocate, calling people a coon, as Dr. Umar did, the guy did just, blurt out calling Umar a liar, in a live public forum, which I think would probably piss anybody off, just about. It's just not a good idea for your first statement in a conversation to be you're a liar or you're lying. You probably want to, lead up to that with, something else, some kind of something. I don't know. I don't know what you lead up to it with, whatever. But anyway, then when, Roland stepped in to address it, to be honest, it did come off kind of unfair, seeing as how, yes, Dr. Umar shouldn't have called, the guy a coon, but the other guy was wrong, and calling him a liar. So he was wrong as well. And it just seemed like Roland was just trying to buck on Umar rather than, moderate fairly and impartially. So I think that, I don't know. To me, it just seemed like kind of an unfair scenario right there. I think the better route to go is to point out the falsehoods, that come from Dr. Umar and show where he's incorrect. Right. Okay. So with that said, let's listen to a clip and talk about it here. I think it will help us to kind of see how Dr. Umar does his thing, man, by stringing together facts with falsehoods and, making points that seem reasonable. But when you break it down, they really aren't. Yeah, let's take a listen here.
It's going to soon become totally comfortable and acceptable for anybody in America to get away with killing black people. This is the purge, the return of unapologetic white racist power. And America was founded on that. And one of the reasons we as African Americans keep on getting the situation wrong is we keep on trying to separate our issues from American history. We'll look at what the Constitution guarantees, but the Constitution never included you. And one thing we know about constitutional law is what? Anything included in the Constitution or in any law that does not reflect the intent of the founding fathers when they wrote the Constitution is automatically unconstitutional. You understand? So from a racist standpoint, the fact that black people are even considered citizens is unconstitutional. Because when Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and George Washington sat down to write that document, did they ever intend for black people to be citizens of America? And the question is absolutely not.
Well, citizenship for black folks is unconstitutional. Wow, that's interesting right there. Man, I tell you, man, when he's talking like in the moment, he just sounds so sensible. You know what I'm saying? Right. Just that combination of facts and falsehoods, but now, actually, first of all, one might ask, Dr. Umar, how is it that this revelation of his managed to escape the attention of Supreme Court justices, legislators, and lawyers from 1866 till now? But nevertheless, he was able to just kind of stumble upon it. It's very interesting. But anyway, we can engage this point more directly than that. So, when we think about what he says there, it's true. The citizenship, who is a citizen or who isn't. It is a matter of constitutional law, right? It is also true, that when dealing with with constitutional law, the guiding principle is to capture the intent of the framers of the Constitution. It's also safe to say that the framers of the Constitution did not have it in their hearts to apply the Constitution to enslaved persons, right? So where's the flaw here? That's what we want to ask. Well, Dr. Umar rests his whole argument on the idea that the question of what is constitutional boils down to what the authors of the Constitution did or did not intend. And they didn't intend for blacks to be citizens. Therefore, our citizenship is unconstitutional. Now, there's two responses we can give to that. All right. Number one, Dr. Umar's take of constitutional intent here, I think, is just overly simplistic. There's a range of approaches related to how people come at the constitutional intent. Broadly speaking, you have two broad camps. What's called strict constructionism and loose constructionism, A strict constructionist is when you have an approach where, the Constitution is just, whatever the framers meant at that time, that's what it is. Whatever they meant, just leave it at that. Loose constructionists are more open to approaching the Constitution based on the spirit of the law. They're going to more so look at the principles behind what the framers put in the Constitution and go from there. For example, a loose constructionist might say, well, the framers intended to establish freedom for all persons, but at the time, among Europeans, whether or not Africans were persons was an unsettled question. However, now we know better. We are freed from that heinous belief that Africans are not humans. And on that basis, we can apply the citizenship that is due to persons to African persons, right? That's a right application of the Constitution. Now, this sort of loose constructionist reasoning is, articulated, for example, in the Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren in the majority opinion that he wrote for the Brown versus Board of Education case. My point here is that, Dr. Umar assumes a strict constructionist interpretation of constitutional law and doesn't seem to realize that loose constructionism is also a legitimate approach to the Constitution and has, throughout our nation's history, it has been. So, though he presents his case as if something is, unconstitutional just because the framers of the Constitution didn't intend this or that at the time the Constitution was drafted, this simply just isn't true, and not in the strict sense, the way that he presents it here. Furthermore, we can debunk Dr. Umar's claim a second way, whether or not the founders intended for black folks to be citizens, they certainly intended for the Constitution to be what's called a living document. They wanted the Constitution and the country built upon it to stand the test of time and to be able to grow. And the framers had the foresight, to put elements in the Constitution that would allow for our legal system and country to grow and change with the times and adapting to new ideas, information, and challenges as well. Now, one of the ways the founders did that was to grant Congress the power to make amendments to the Constitution. We find this laid out in Article 5 of the Constitution. Now, it is the 14th Amendment to the Constitution which granted African enslaved persons citizenship, right? The issue of slavery and African personhood, which played a central role in almost, tearing this country apart, was a threat to the nation that the founders established. And I doubt they imagined would play out as it did, right? But fortunately, they intended for this country to be able to grow and change, as I said, and made a way for this to be done by amendment. And the 14th Amendment is a perfect example of the founders' intent of a flexible yet maturing America. Now, in that sense, we can certainly trace American citizenship of African descendants back to the intent of the framers of the Constitution. Therefore, Dr. Umar's claim about citizenship of African people in America being unconstitutional is basically a bunch of bull crap. So anyway, let's move to a second clip. We're just getting started here, folks. Obviously his claim about citizenship being unconstitutional is just silly. So we've already covered that. Now with this one, I want you to pay attention to the steps in his argument as he makes his case, okay? And then we'll expose the foolery here in a second, all right? So check this out.
See, the Obama years, and it's our fault, not Obama's, because we took a time out from political social agitation, we created an atmosphere in America where it's safe to ignore black people because black people voluntarily ignored themselves for 8 years.
You know why? Because Barack was that caddy truck. He was a symbol.
He was the symbol.
And we was happy with the symbol.
Without substance. Mm-hmm. And that's our problem. Now, remember, right after Trump got elected, there was a women's march. Remember that? Mm-hmm. A lot of the same white women who put Trump in office turned around and marched. It wasn't because they were against Trump. Remember, after the Dr. King assassination, America decided on a social policy of never allowing the black agenda to be primary ever again. So whenever a president is elected, they automatically give them a non-black minority issue that will pretty much define their campaign. So with Barack Obama, it was the LGBT. So when he got elected, he went to war for the LBGTs as a way to eclipse our issues. As soon as Donald Trump got elected, you had the Women's March. Mm-hmm. So they're making it, and you had the immigrant situation right after that. So the minority issues during the Trump administration is going to be female issues and immigrant issues. No time for black people.
Now, the context here All right, is Dr. Umar commenting on politics and issues that concern black people being addressed or not being addressed from a presidential standpoint. And he actually makes some solid points about the black community not being politically active and therefore not seeing the outcomes that folks would want to see. Now I think Dr. Umar would have been good right there, if he would just kind of just stick with that point. But notice the move right after that. He was doing all right, then he hit us with the okie doke. He's trying to build a case for why he believes Trump is going to ignore black people. And he says, remember, after the Dr. King assassination, America decided, quote unquote, on a social policy to never allow the black agenda to be primary ever again. Now, first of all, Dr. Umar just asserts that, as if it's a fact without giving evidence to support it. Now to some extent, I'll give him a pass on that one. We can't expect him to give a history lesson on every single point that he makes. With that said, I did notice that Dr. Umar did this a few times, where he'll say something like, America decided, or white America realized, or America figured, or, something along those lines. And what he does with that, like you see here, in this clip I just played, he'll start building his case with some unsupported assertion, about what America did or America decided. And he just basically expects us to take his word for it, as a fact. And then from that starting point, he'll add on a couple more layers, and then he hits you with his conclusion, So it's like, you accept the fact, the unsupported statement as fact. And then it kind of, adds like an unjustified credibility to the rest of what he says as he works toward the conclusion that he wants you to see. So it's like, social policy against the black agenda. Oh, yeah. Okay. Obama did focus on the LGBT community, and there was, those women marching against Trump, Dr. Umar sounds like he's on to something, right? On to something reasonable. It kind of in a way, it reminds me of boxing a little bit. I did some MMA and also some boxing for a couple of years. And, one basic strategy, that was tried and true, man, is, you just want to set up your power punches by using your jab, right? Typically the jab is a weaker punch. But, once you get the opponent a few times with the jab, then you want to switch it up on him and hit him with something, stronger. I think the same thing is going on here. Dr. Umar says after MLK decided, America decided on a social policy to shut down the black agenda. Boom, there's the jab right there, right? And what Umar wants to do is use that unsupported assertion to make his case seem plausible and then set us up for no time for black people, his conclusion. Now, like I said, we wouldn't expect Dr. Umar to give a thorough history lesson on every point, but that doesn't mean that we should just accept what Dr. Umar says, just, outright, as a matter of fact, if we have, we can kind of step back and think critically for a moment and find ourselves with a good reason, to doubt Umar's initial point about America deciding on a social policy to keep the black agenda off the table. And if we can see that there are other explanations for these other issues being a focus for Obama and Trump, then we have good reason to not trust the conclusion that Dr. Umar wants us to come to, based on those points, right? Now, I think that actually is the case. I think it is the case. When you think about it, to say America decided on a social policy to stifle the black agenda, that's just a huge claim. He said that they, quote unquote, give them, other issues to deal with, he says, to distract people from the black agenda. Well, who is this mysterious they that Dr. Umar is talking about? When and where did this they, when did this happen? When and where did this happen? When you say America decided, like, what does that even mean? Was a bill passed in Congress to stifle the black agenda, or was there some kind of executive order, to go out saying that this would be the case? Did all white people or, just even just the leaders kind of get together in some secret, board meeting or something like that to declare that this was the new policy, and if so, where's the evidence, that something like this occurred? My point is just with such a large claim, no evidence that I'm aware of to support it. There's just no good reason to take it by blind faith that Dr. Umar is correct about that. Really, instead of raising the reasonableness of his case here, I think Dr. Umar is actually giving me grounds to be skeptical of his claims because it's just such a huge claim that he I don't believe he can support with any kind of evidence. At least none that I'm aware of. Now, given the type of crowds that Dr. Umar seems to do well with, I think that the strength behind this claim about America decided and, this whole business is that it feeds into the conspiracy theory type thinking out there, which seems to be more prevalent among the conscious community crowd than maybe some others, Now, I can sympathize with that. I mean, I've got a little conspiracy side to me too. So conspiracy theory side to me too. But I try to balance it out with reason, the example he gives, with Obama. Obama was at LGBT rallies working towards the election. During his campaign. I distinctly remember at one of them, he said that your fight is my fight. He said that to a crowd at an LGBT rally, so it's not all that surprising. For anybody who paid close attention to his campaign or even just has a basic knowledge of the general platform for the Democratic Party, which, parallel the shifting moral landscape in America. Before Obama, the LGBT movement was gaining steam, particularly in the entertainment world, where you had, more and more gay characters in movies, sitcoms, obviously Ellen DeGeneres and all that sort of thing. With all that going on, it really shouldn't be surprising at all, with these political and social trends predating Obama. It shouldn't be any surprising at all that Obama spent 8 years fighting for the LGBT. That's kind of what the party's been about for a little while now. It's not really a shocker, especially since, black folks traditionally don't really turn out to vote for real. So I'm sure that the LGBT vote, really helped to get him over. But yeah, I think that just seemed to be more so of a product of the direction culture had been heading rather than some type of secret policy of holding off the black agenda. It's just that Umar's version doesn't seem plausible to me because we just have no evidence of this policy. We can point to evidence of a precursor to Obama's involvement with the LGBT movement that was present in the Democratic Party and then also in the culture at large. Likewise with Trump. Lord, I'm trying to be careful what I say here, but Lord knows Donald Trump did everything he possibly could to get on the bad side of women in America during his campaign. Calling women fat, publicly saying a woman was bleeding out of her, whatever that means. They have audio of him bragging about fondling women without their permission, without the woman's permission, and that's leaked to the public. Really, there's just no mystery whatsoever as to why women marched against Trump. You know what I'm saying? I don't think there's no conspiracy needed there. As a matter of fact, since those marches, I don't really recall hearing anything about a women's agenda since Trump has been in office. So it just doesn't seem to me even like they're distracting him from much of anything. I don't think he's really all that concerned. He hasn't really gotten involved in any kind of women's agenda. And then Umar mentions immigrants as well as being a means of distracting from black issues. But obviously, one of the most central aspects of Trump's campaign was building the wall, between us and Mexico and having them pay for it and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, you had the whole Muslim issue. Donald Trump spent a substantial amount of time, speaking out against, what he believes to be the threat of Islam, and that sort of thing. So it's just, immigration is just, nowhere near a new issue. And given Trump's plan for, building the wall again, it's just not surprising that immigration is a hot button issue. He literally ran just about his whole campaign on it, so to say that, that's an issue that was given, there's just no evidence for that. There's good reason to think that these immigrant and women's issues are coming up for things that we can observe in society and also in his own campaign, right? So, given that we have no evidence by which to affirm Dr. Umar's social policy theory, just kind of kicking aside the black agenda and just, the examples that he gave are, easily explained just by looking at just the context surrounding the Obamas and Trump's campaign. He just doesn't leave us with much to go on in support of, Umar's prediction of Trump having, quote, no time for black people, It's just his conclusion. He might end up being right, but it's just he hasn't given us good reason for that, and it's just, yeah. Anyway, I do think that, Dr. Umar might be correct about black issues not getting addressed with this administration. I mean, it's possible. But Umar's case kind of loses steam when you realize it's pretty much just relies upon, what can we say? Just vague conspiracy theorism linked together with events that common sense and context can account for, But anyway, those are just two examples, and that kind of hopefully paint a picture of, what we're on the lookout for when it comes to this quicksand of poor reasoning that Dr. Umar gives us in these interviews here. Umar's a very compelling speaker, man. Very forceful, very passionate about what he's saying. But just because someone is, gets you emotionally engaged or even makes sense, some of the time, doesn't mean that we ought to ignore the sorts of things that I'm pointing out here, or else we find ourselves falling a victim to the ideological shell game, that people like Dr. Umar Johnson tend to play. Now let's move on quickly here. Let's get into the fun stuff. All right, we want to talk about worldviews a little bit. Get into the fun stuff here. All right. Now, if there's anything we know about Dr. Umar, it is that he is a Pan-Africanist, through and through. Broadly speaking, Pan-Africanism is rooted in the idea that peoples of African descent have, common interests and should be unified. Now there are different types of Pan-Africanists. Okay. Some would be what we might call soft Pan-Africanists who adopt, the Pan-Africanist view as it relates to a specific area like economics or, preservation of cultural identity or, politics or something like that. Now, Dr. Umar is what I would call a hard Pan-Africanist. I say that because, it's clear that Dr. Umar, he's a Pan-Africanist in every area of his life, including spirituality. The whole nine. It's just who he is. Now, if we understand that, then we're able to make sense of some of the seemingly outlandish views that Dr. Umar espouses. Now, if you adopt the Pan-Africanist paradigm, as Dr. Umar does, then really his views follow logically from his worldview. At least in the broad strokes of it. Okay, on the surface. One thing we know about Dr. Umar is that everything pretty much boils down to the question, is it good for black people or bad for black people? It's simple as that, right? Even when he's bashing the church or religion in general, usually he's not dealing with whether or not this or that claim made by a particular religion is true or false. Dr. Umar's main beef with religions like Christianity or Islam more so has to do with the belief that they aren't helpful in moving the black race forward toward his vision of African independence and self-sufficiency. Okay. Remember, Dr. Umar stated that he was a Pan-African nationalist, and later on in the video, in the Breakfast Club interview. And, he wants to see an independent black kingdom, if you will, right? That's what Dr. Umar is all about. Now, when dialoguing or debating with others, it's helpful to have a good grasp of their overall worldview. I think for at least two reasons. Number one, worldviews are like a house, in that the same way a house has a foundation, it's built upon, likewise, every worldview has a number of foundational beliefs, or key aspects. Okay. They kind of, foundational beliefs are key aspects. Now, if you understand the foundational ideas of a particular worldview, then it helps to avoid dead ends in the conversation. So for example, in the Roland Martin interview, Roland asked Dr. Umar, why he wouldn't buy a charter school, right? And Dr. Umar replied that as a Pan-Africanist, by general principle, he believes that if anything is done for black people, it ought to be done by black people. Therefore, he says, why would I want a charter school? Because charter schools are owned by the state. So, that's not in line with my Pan-Africanist ideology. So, in that part of the interview, it seemed like Dr. Umar kind of scored a point with that remark. But really, I think it was just a matter of Roland not being familiar with, Umar's views. I don't know how much he's interacted with him or, watched Dr. Umar in the past. By being familiar with someone's worldview, you can kind of get at the root of their thinking and, challenge their position more effectively, I think. It's like playing a game of Jenga, where you stack the blocks, everybody takes a turn pulling a block until somebody makes it fall. Okay. With worldviews, it's kind of the same way. In this case, we're dealing with Dr. Umar's Pan-Africanism. if we can demonstrate that his Pan-African worldview relies upon some faulty ideas that are foundational to his worldview, then we can demonstrate how those essential parts fail. And in doing that, we can show how those failing ideas cause the worldview to collapse on itself, including the conclusions that Dr. Umar is trying to sell us on, which flow from his Pan-African worldview, right? So, while we're talking about Pan-Africanism, I just want to make an interesting observation here. All right. Yeah, I know Dr. Umar isn't too fond of Christianity, yet he is committed to his Pan-Africanist position. And, to his credit, he is about uniting people, African people across, religious lines. And so it seems to me that he's found an interesting way to criticize Christianity without stepping on the toes of the overall agenda, what he's trying to do. If you notice, right, Umar doesn't, I'll just say Dr. Umar rarely ever speaks out against Christianity itself. When you think about it, even in these videos here with the Breakfast Club, I don't think he really gets on it with the with the Roland interview or the other one that I pulled. But 9 times out of 10, he launches his criticisms against the church. Right? He'll talk about the church still having pictures of white Jesus up, and actually on that point I agree with him. I think that given the context of how much of it's the white Jesus picture is a hurdle, to so many coming to the faith, I think it is time to let him go. White Jesus got to go, man. You got to take a break. But anyway, also he'll talk about, the church being not being an economic benefit to the black community. He loves to rant about that, for sure. I think that by, aiming at the church and not Christianity per se, or more specifically, he accomplishes 2 things. One, he knows the church is still a big entity in the black community. So if he's going to get anywhere with his agenda, he's got to keep a way open to kind of slide in the back door of these churches, right? I mean, when you think about it, I guess he figures he can always say, well, I didn't really diss Christianity. I'm just talking about the practices and that I disagree with, or, parts of the ideology that have been, influenced or culturally colonized by the white man, or, something like that, And, then some church leaders might be like, oh, okay, well, we don't have any, white Jesus pictures hanging around, and, we're about helping the black struggle. So, Dr. Umar isn't talking about us, meanwhile, they opened the door to this man who is spewing ideas that run counter to the gospel, as a matter of fact, I think at the end of the Breakfast Club interview, he says that he's going to be at a particular church, speaking or whatever. And it's not, I know it's not new for him. I think he's been doing that for a while, speaking in churches. So, in the name of freeing their people, from earthly oppression, these pastors and, whatever other leaders, set the stage for Christians, under their leadership to be enslaved, by an unbiblical worldview, that Dr. Umar is sharing, Now, the other side of the coin as to why Dr. Umar is careful, or I think we can use the word strategic about how he criticizes the church and Christianity, I think has to do with Pan-African history. As a matter of fact, I was kind of surprised by a particular comment that he made. And matter of fact, let me go ahead and play it right quick. All right. Now, what I find interesting about that, right, is that clip right there. If there was ever a movement that truly idealized the idea of black people having their own, it would be Pan-Africanism, right? But when you start digging around the history of the Pan-African movement and just Pan-Africanism more broadly, you quickly realize you can't do a survey of Pan-African history without running into Christian Pan-Africanists, right? I mean, even going back to the infancy stage of the Pan-African movement, there are Christians right there. Now, for anybody who's followed me for a while, you've probably heard me quote the legendary Pan-Africanist Mark Garvey, giving his stance on Christianity, how he affirmed that, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and nobody can twist his arm into disbelieving, the gospel based upon or on the account of the gospel having been misused by Europeans for their own gain. But anybody who studied the history knows that we can take it even further than that, can't we? Right? We could talk about Alexander Crummell, or Episcopalian minister Alexander Crummell, who, after ministering for some years, presented lectures in Europe to raise awareness on the plight of African slaves. He studied at Cambridge, and then he moved to Liberia in 1853 with the goal of, in mind, of preaching to and educating Native Africans and ultimately building an independent African nation there. Now, in Alexander Crummell, we have here is the earliest embers, of Pan-Africanism starting to burn there, right? Or we could talk about, Martin Delany. Now, I'm sure Dr. Umar knows quite a bit about Delany. I mean, who worked alongside Dr. Umar's purported ancestor, Frederick Douglass and William Cooper Nell, with their newspaper. They developed the North Star. Martin Delany fought against the Confederates in the Civil War. And, he wrote a book about black nationalism. I actually happen to have it on my computer, where he outlines in like 1 or 2 chapters his conviction that no such movement for black nationalism, which is what his entire book was about, no such movement for black nationalism would work unless the God of the Bible was at the heart of it. I mean, these guys I'm talking about here, I mean, look, if you were to sculpt a Mount Rushmore of Pan-Africanism, you would have 2 or 3 Christians looking down at you. Or shoot, I tell you what, we can make it even more interesting here. Make the conversation even more interesting. We can talk about Edward Blyden. Edward Blyden. Now, I've seen some refer to Blyden as the father of the Pan-Africanist movement. He had followed an interesting path. I mean, he launches out, much like Alexander Crummell, as a Christian, moving to Africa to develop a powerful black nation. That was his goal. Then later on, he dabbles in Islam, and from what I understand, he kind of waffles, back to Christianity. Some say it's inconclusive whether he deconverted from Christianity or remained, remained a non-Christian or not. But what's really fascinating here about Edward Blyden is how he got started on his path to Pan-Africanism, I guess we could say. You see, Edward Blyden wanted to be a minister. He wanted to go to seminary. But unfortunately, it was back in the 1800s or so, he was rejected, by the racist institutions of the time. So his friend and mentor gave him the idea of going back to Africa and starting his own thing. That's kind of what launches him on the path to Pan-Africanism. Interestingly, his friend and mentor was a white Dutch Reformed minister by the name of John Knox. Now that's fascinating, isn't it? Well, Dr. Umar says that Christianity has poisoned the minds of black folks from having their own. And, yet we see Christians laying the foundations of the Pan-African ideology and movement that he has built his life around. Even in studying the history of Edward Blyden, the so-called father of Pan-Africanism. Well, as it turns out, that it may very well be the case that the grandfather of Pan-Africanism was a white man, the white Dutch Reformed minister, John Knox. That's a provocative idea. But I digress. We could take it further than that, but we'd be here all day. So let's get down to the nitty gritty here. All right. The main questions that emerged from these recent Umar interviews. All right. I will say this, though. Speaking of Umar bashing the church, let me just kind of a little side note. I find it interesting that Dr. Umar has so much to say about what the church is doing with black people's money. Part of me wants to be like, bruh, what are you doing with black people's money? You talk about the church, being accountable. And I mean, this 14 million, per week that he's always, bringing up might be a little bit difficult to get a handle on, right? Given that we'd have to deal with, who knows how many churches to figure out, where all that 14 million is going. It probably would take a lot of groundwork, but you're just one man. You're just one man with one fundraising project, and you refuse to give an account for the close to $1 million for this school that nobody's seen yet. It's just like the pot called the kettle black. How about when you have an independent CPA or something like that come in and report to the people where the money went, then you can resume talking about church money. You got to practice what you preach there, bro. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sure there's something in the principles of my art. Was it like, truth, justice, and reciprocity? You know what I mean? We need some reciprocity here. You're going to dish it out about, financial accountability in the church. Then I think you ought to be financially accountable for the close to $1 million that you've raised, that nobody knows where it is. Anyway, so back to the, we're gonna leave that alone. Remember, we're not trying to discredit Umar. We're just gonna demonstrate where he's wrong. We're gonna leave it at that. All right, so let's get to the main questions. I digress again. let's move on here. Let's deal with this question about racism and systematic change that came up in the Roland interview. Take a listen to this clip right here, and we'll get into it.
Lauren.
So the question of interracial marriage,
Yes,
I mean,
ma'am.
come on, man. You're too smart for this. We got
What?
43.
I'm too smart for what?
We got 43 million black people in this country.
And
we
that
got
means
over
what?
190 million white people. You're going to sit here and say that if
And you
a
got
black
half the
person,
black
a white
women.
person get married, a black person, a white person get married, one can't understand the other person's struggle. You've seen
It's not
you've
about
seen Tim Wise, right?
individualism.
You've seen
It's
Reverend
about
Wallace. You've
systematic
seen white people who
empowerment.
understand racism very well.
That doesn't mean they're going to do anything about
The other thing
it.
that is obviously true is they understand racism when you see things like the murder of Medgar Evers, like the murder of Martin Luther King. They understand racism
And
just
what
fine.
did they do about it?
They understand us gaining just fine, and that's why murder happened.
Based on
right?
what?
So the idea that somehow a white person can't understand our struggle,
I
no
could
way.
care less what they understand. I'm
No
asking
way.
you, what have they done systematically
He already
to
told you
improve
that.
the opportunities
He
of white
already
folks?
told you
He
that.
did not tell
Oh,
me
yes,
that.
you did tell
He
tell
did
you
not
that.
tell me that.
Now, we see here we've got Dr. Umar being questioned by, one of the panel members who starts out dealing with him on opposing interracial marriage because according to Dr. Umar, a white woman can't understand the black man's struggle. Now, what's interesting here is when the panel member presses him on this point, notice he changes the playing field a little bit. He says, I could care less about what white people understand. I'm asking you, what have they done to systematically improve the opportunities of white folks? He says white folks, but I think he just obviously misspoke there. He meant black folks, right? Now, just as a reminder, just a few days before on the Breakfast Club interview, he said, a white woman can never understand a black man's struggle. She needs to be able to feel you. That was it's like one of his main points, defending this idea that there's something wrong with interracial marriage, So 1 minute, Dr. Umar is making a passionate case about, white people not being able to understand the black struggle. And the next thing you know, on the Roland show, he could care less about it. What he really wants to know is, what have white folks done systematically to address oppression? This is how the discussion shifts over to the question of, what have white people done to systematically even the playing field for black folks. It basically comes from Dr. Umar really moving the goalposts is what he's doing here, rather than engaging head on the questions that are being posed to him. It's just a classic example of moving the goalpost, man. I'm telling you. But nevertheless, let's tackle the question now. Rather than me just hurling out a few examples, I thought it would be fun, to point out how Dr. Umar actually answers his own question. Let's take another look at another clip. Let's check out the first segment of his Breakfast Club interview, and then let's see what we can see here.
All is well. Just came back from China and Japan.
Okay.
My first visits over there speaking with the African
China and
community.
Japan?
And Japan.
Really?
I spent a week in Japan, Tokyo and Nagoya.
Okay.
And then they flew
Nagoya's
me.
dope.
Yeah,
Tokyo's dope
Nagoya
too.
is dope. I really enjoyed it. And then I went to Shanghai and Beijing. It was bittersweet. Sweet because it was good seeing African people in a different setting from America. Okay, I had never been to China. So it was very good to see that. The bitter side is the fact that we're not treated well over there. Really? I'm not
Really?
surprised at that.
What you mean?
But I was taken aback by the extent to which racism is practiced against blacks in China openly.
Really?
So in America, we have a civil rights culture. So racism, you have to tuck it under.
Has to be covert.
It has to be covert.
Yeah.
And China is very much
So,
overt.
like, what kind of things happen? I've never been to China. I've always wanted to go, but
In Japan too, or just China?
I'm going to say China, not so much in,
Yeah,
in Japan.
They show a lot of love. They love our culture.
More
and they
so
really respect
China,
our culture. Yeah,
because America has a very close relationship with Japan. They're the third leg of the Trilateral Commission. So the Japanese are considered the white men of Asia. So we're speaking of China in particular. There were certain nightclubs that we couldn't go into.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And they will tell you no black people are allowed here. There's certain sections of certain neighborhoods you can't live in. So, for example, if they don't want you in a certain section in Brooklyn, they will just use clever real estate tactics to keep you out.
Absolutely.
Okay, i.e. your credit ain't good enough or the bank didn't approve your loan. They don't have to do that in China. Exactly.
They're direct with it.
They're direct with it. We don't want black people here.
Now, notice in Dr. Umar's comments about China, all right, he himself draws a distinction between the type or the degree to which racism is practiced in China and racism we find here in America. All right. Dr. Umar observes that over there, they have open racism. And he says you have to, over here in America, you have to tuck it in. Okay. He says over there, it's overt and over here, it's covert. Right. Well, it begs the question. Why is that, Dr. Umar? Why is it that over there, as you pointed out, they can plainly say no blacks allowed, and, bar you from buying a home in certain areas. But over here, in order to do the same thing, a realtor would have to be slick about it, right? As he said, they would have to, deny you because of your credit or, something like that. And it was interesting is even, Angela Yee, she, one of the hosts on the Breakfast Club, chimes in at that point and talks about how her dad is Chinese, but, her mom is black and her Chinese grandparents had a problem with it and wouldn't come to her parents' wedding. But then it's interesting, she makes a, kind of a nonchalant comment and says, yeah, my aunts and uncles, they were cool with it because, they're Chinese, but, they were born here. So they're all good, But again, Dr. Umar, why is that? Why is there a difference between America and China in terms of the levels of racism? Why is it that, what is it about America where you see less, you see more over there? Huh? Well, let's get back to our question about systemic change, shall we? Now, notice the examples of Chinese racism that Dr. Umar points out. Housing and access to public places. Now, in this exchange, with the panel member on the Roland Martin show, Dr. Umar was sure to emphasize that he was talking about systemic change. Now, he calls it systematic change, but I think he means systemic because he contrasts it with individual change or efforts. Now, in regard to housing, right, the reason why realtors can't get away with overt racism here in the States is because of federal legislation. More specifically, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which made the type of discrimination, that Dr. Umar encountered in China illegal across the United States. Now, when we speak of change on a systemic level here in the States, there really is no system bigger than the U.S. government. Actually, I think it was the gentleman on the Roland panel. I think his name was Eugene, the one that got called a coon in the video. I think he pointed this out. I mean, there's no bigger system in America than the government. And then I guess I could add to that, the economic system. But I mean, between those two systems, I mean, there's nothing really higher than that, But we'll get to that in a minute. But when you think about it, eliminating housing discrimination it's no small thing, right? Because we're not just talking about, where you can or can't live. By passing legislation to remove housing barriers, the federal government, the highest system in America, made it possible for African Americans to move to places where they had access to better schools. Quality education has traditionally been a good indicator of future success, better jobs and whatnot. As a matter of fact, we could talk about the busing laws that would come along a few years later in order to, put some force behind the Brown versus Board of Education decision, in terms of, evening that playing field, from an education opportunity standpoint. But the Fair Housing Act, also meant that black families could position themselves in areas where there are more jobs and earning potential, right? The act also broadened the opportunities for African Americans to build wealth through home ownership in areas where they could potentially accrue more equity than they otherwise might have. If I'm not mistaken, I mean, most wealth in America is obtained generationally. So there's just no doubt that taking the shackles off the housing market from a federal level definitely opened the door for more black folks to move up the economic ladder. Better schools or, more equity, better homes. I mean, it's just, the Fair Housing Act is what systemic change in America looks like. That's what systemic change looks like. And I think I got to give credit to my man, Leroy Hill, for this next point I'm about to make. Shout out to my man, Leroy. But I think the disconnect between, Dr. Umar and the panel that he was dealing with on the Roland show is like when he's talking about systemic change, or what he calls systematic change, I think he kind of has it in his mind that what that looks like is like a universal or kind of blanket positive outcome for all black people. You see what I'm saying? Like, but that's not how systemic change works. At least not in America. I mean, generally speaking, when you're talking about systemic change, it could be the matter of like the Fair Housing Act, which, takes the shackles off of an opportunity that was previously inaccessible. Now, once that opportunity is there, I mean, an opportunity is an opportunity. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to take advantage of it. Some people from the passing of the Housing Act till now have purchased homes that they otherwise would not have been able to purchase. Other people who, are also have the legal opportunity to do so have not purchased those homes. Okay. Now, this is not to say, I just want to make clear, I'm not saying that, everything is hunky dory for black people. I'm really not. I do recognize that, there's a legacy of oppression in this country, that still needs to be overcome. There's no doubt about it, But I just think that we have to be careful about how we communicate our points if we want to be taken seriously. And so when Dr. Umar just kind of throws out, this kind of nebulous idea of systematic change, and when you have clear examples of the highest system in America, making changes that, clearly allowed for the advancement of black folks and at least to some extent, provided a means by which folks can kind of even that playing field, or just really to even the playing field in general. It just really caused, people like Dr. Umar to lose credibility. Now, before I move on, remember what Dr. Umar said about not being allowed to go into certain clubs. Now, why is that going on in China, but not here in the U.S.? Well, we can take it back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, the Fair Housing Act is also called, I guess it's kind of like the Civil Rights Act Part 2, I guess you could say. But the first one is the Civil Rights Act the first one in that era was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which had provisions in it that outlawed discrimination in public facilities. Now, to understand the significance of this, we have to note that from the Constitution, okay, Congress has the power to pass laws pertaining to the regulation of commerce, right, throughout the United States. And see, that's a real issue right there. It's not just about being able to go dance and buy a drink, at whatever establishment that you want. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, among other things, removed the constraints from black folks in terms of accessing goods and services that were available to the public. Again, it's about commerce. Okay. Now, one of the Roland panel members brings up the Civil Rights Act, and Dr. Umar tries to counter with a short story, or short history rather, about additions being made to these bills that made them somehow racist. He says that there was still racism in that bill, whatever he means by that. I think Dr. Umar is misunderstanding or misrepresenting history a bit here, but for the sake of argument, let's just say that there were politicians who added gender and sexual orientation to these civil rights acts, and by that somehow women and homosexuals were able to rob black people of the rights and protection those bills made a reality. Now, even if that were true, it still wouldn't help Dr. Umar's case for at least three reasons. Number one, if there were politicians who attempted to corrupt the bill, the civil rights bill before it became a law, I mean, that still doesn't negate the fact that there were other white congressmen, along with Lyndon Johnson, who fought to get this bill passed, and allow for greater housing and commerce-related freedoms for black folks. That's number one. Number two, if women and homosexuals somehow hijacked the Civil Rights Act in such a way that black folks couldn't benefit from what was intended in the Civil Rights Act, it doesn't logically follow from that therefore there was racism in that bill itself, as Dr. Umar claims. First of all, in saying that women and homosexuals stripped away the benefits that were intended for black folks through the Civil Rights Bill, Dr. Umar is actually saying then that there were indeed benefits intended in the bill. If there were benefits intended in the bill, well, who intended it? Right? Well, you'd have to say the people who put the Civil Rights Act on the table were the ones who intended these benefits for African Americans. And you've got to go back to JFK, who got the conversation going before he was assassinated. And then, Lyndon Johnson, who follows it up and sees the Civil Rights Act through to its completion, to being made a law. So you got two white people, making moves for systemic change to benefit black folks, along with all the white congressmen who voted for it, to even the playing field in regard to housing opportunities and then access to goods and services, commerce there, as I spoke about. Now, the fact that these white folks intended and fought for legislation to open up housing and commerce opportunities for African Americans isn't negated just because homosexuals and women supposedly came along later and took advantage of it. I mean, when you think about it, that would be like me, say, letting you borrow my car, to go grocery shopping, and then somebody takes the car from you and then robs a bank with it, right? Now, just because the bank robber came along and used my car to do something illegal doesn't mean that I didn't intend for you to use, my car to go to the store, right? My intentions are a separate matter from what the bank robber did. And so likewise, the intentions of the white folks who passed the 64 Civil Rights Act, and then also the Civil Rights Act of 1968, aka the Fair Housing Act, to benefit black people isn't negated by others supposedly coming along later on to take advantage of it. The fact still remains that there were white people who worked together in the highest system in our land to effect positive change for black people. So Dr. Umar just makes this huge claim that, nobody in America, no white person in America has ever worked on behalf of black people to even the playing field and get rid of, privilege. But this gives us the, one example. All we need is one, to disprove his claim, since he says it's never happened. So, this gives us the one example that we need, actually just two examples, to disprove Dr. Umar's irrational, absolute claim that this has never happened in America. Third point, I think this is perhaps the most obvious, actually. Regardless who added what to the Civil Rights Act, we can see, based upon Dr. Umar's comments on China, that at least some systemic change has taken place here, right? Right now in China, black people have discriminatory limitations placed upon them when it comes to housing and engaging in commerce and public spaces. The same thing used to be the case here in America. However, this is no longer the case in America. There are forms of systemic oppression that are present in China that are no longer present here because at the highest system level in our country, white folks fought for and saw the passage of laws that on a national systemic level made the overt racism as seen in China illegal here in the States. So by Dr. Umar's own observations, we see that it is evident that his claim that, there's never been, white folks to work toward even in the playing field systemically. It's just demonstrably false, by Dr. Umar's own testimony of what he observed in China. Now, again, don't get it twisted. Everything in America isn't all peaches and cream for black folks. It's interesting, man. Like sometimes I feel like I come across I'm too conservative for my liberal friends, and I'm too liberal for my conservative friends, and I kind of find myself in this middle ground where I kind of have to defend my views against both of them. But let me make this clear: there's still injustice going on in America. I'm not negating that whatsoever. America, we still got a ways to go. All right, don't get it twisted. I think an honest assessment of the facts tell us that we're still seeing, ripple effects or, the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow lingering today. I just have, to me, there's just no doubt about that, but I do believe, again, that, critical thinking, intellectual honesty, and being accurate in one's assessment of things is important. And again, when Dr. Umar, takes the kind of stance that he did here, he just, again, he falls, flat on his face, and it's just hard to take him serious. Moving right along. All right.